So when we load in our water level data, right, and we want to put that load command in our script or our function, whatever we're writing, so that it loads the data whenever we want to run that script or function. So whenever we loaded the water level data, it's going to create a variable called water level, right? And it's going to be equal to a big matrix. What do we say are the rows of this matrix? What do they represent?
The 8 years.
Years or months? Months.
12 months.
So we have 12 rows for the 12 months.
And the column is the year.
And the columns are the years, right? We have 8 columns for the 8 years. And then we said, we talked about how to calculate those averages, right? We said, so the next task, I forgot, this was part of my crazy this morning. I was going to change these to be A, B, C, and D on the bullets, and that didn't happen. So we'll have to pretend like the tasks are letters instead of just bullets. So we did the first task, we did the loading, we got this data into MATLAB. For task B, we want to calculate the 3 different averages. How do we calculate those 3 different averages? So how do we get the average water level for each year?
For each year is average mean water level.
We just take the mean of the whole matrix, right? Yeah. And that gives us the average in each year, which is the average of each column, right? What if I want the average in each month? That's the average in each row, right? So what do I have to do to change my mean function?
The same
Put the apostrophe, which does what? Transpose. So flip the rows and the columns. And then if I want the average over the entire 8-year period, what did I have to do? Mean of the mean, right? So that takes care of task number 2. So we've done task 1, we've done task 2. What about task 3? So we say for each month and each year. What should I be thinking there automatically? What kind of things am I going to need? Loop? What kind of loops? While loops or for loops? For loops. 2 for loops, because I have 2 things changing. I have month changing and I have year changing, right? So let's think about what those loops are going to look like. Before, we don't even have to read the rest of the problem. We know we're going to need 2 for loops at this point. So let's talk about what those look like. Hopefully this will be helpful for the quiz on Friday. So what's our first for loop going to change?
For the years, which is the columns.
So we can do years or we can do months. Does it matter what the order is?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't matter. We get to pick that. That's our decision. We get to tell MATLAB what to do. So we can pick month first or we can pick year first. It doesn't really matter what we do. So Abdul said year, so let's do year. So let's call our index variable the year, right? And then we say equal to something, colon, something, colon, something. What's my first blank there? What does that mean that I put a 1 there?
The first column?
The first column, that tells MATLAB I'm going to pull the first column of data out of my water level matrix. What's the second number that I put there?
The increment.
The increment, and what is that number going to be? And why is it a 1?
Because we want to go for each column.
We want to go for each column, so we want to go from the first column to the second column to the third column all the way to the last column, right? We're not going to do half columns or skip a column or anything like that, so we want to increment by 1. What's our last number over there? What do we normally put over there? The length, right? So if I have length, what is length going to give me? So the longest, what, Ellie, you said? The longest dimension of the whole matrix, right? So let's load in the water level data. what do I have to be careful about when I do my loading? Where should that mat file be? Or where does it have to be? In that same directory, right? I got to make sure that I can see it over here. Otherwise, I'm going to get an error that it can't find the water level data. So now that I have water level in there, if I open it up, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be, right? We have 12 rows, we have 8 columns. I can look at it there, or over here in my workspace, MATLAB tells me it's 12 by 8, right? That tells me, that confirms that I set this up correctly. So what happens if I take the length of water level? We said it was going to be my longest dimension. So do I expect it to give me 8 or 12? 12, and in fact it gives me 12, right? Which, is that what we want for this? No, we want 8, right? Because we have 8 years. So what command can we use to give us an 8?
We can use the size.
We can use the size. So what does size do? So if we take size of water level, it's going to give me 2 numbers automatically. It gives me 12, which is my number of rows, and it gives me 8, which is my number of columns, right? And that's what size is going to give me all the time. It's going to be 12, or it's going to be rows and then columns. So what do I want? Do I want the rows or do I want the columns?
You want the column.
The columns,
Which is number 2.
which is the second dimension. So I have to tell MATLAB size of water level, comma 2, and that will give me 8, the second dimension. Rows is the first dimension, columns is the second dimension. So if I were to do size of water level, comma 1, I would get a 12, because that's my first dimension, that's the rows. Yes, ma'am?
Could you just type 8 into the third thing?
You could, right? But what happens, what if I give you a new water level set of data, and I only have 5 years? Right? That causes a problem. So it kind of works, but then we want our code to be flexible to adjust to different situations, right? It's just good programming practice to kind of use these length and size functions to help us do that. Would I necessarily count that wrong? No, if you put an 8 there. All right, questions about size and length functions? Does that make sense? Okay, so what do we want to put here?
Size of water level
1 or 2? 2, because that's my number of columns, right? What is my second for loop going to do? The month? What's my first value here? 1. Why? First row. What's my second value here? 1. Why? We want every row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Back to the counting. We're good at that in this class. What do we put in this last number over here? So we could do size of water level, comma 1, or
Can we write size of water level?
size of water level is going to give us 2 values, right? It's going to give us 12 and 8.
Oh, length we can write.
We could do length, right? We could do either one. We could use the size or we could do the length. Let's do the size. So my year for loop is going to repeat how many times? 8. And my month for loop is going to repeat how many times? 12, right? We set it up that way. MATLAB always does what we tell it to do, regardless if that's good or bad. Right? So now what are we going to do inside of our for loop? Now we have to go back to read the problem. So I didn't even have to read that whole thing. Now I got these for loops set up. So what are we going to do? We said for each month and each year, if the water level meets the conditions below, we're going to display some stuff. So the first condition is if if the water level is greater than 50 feet above the average water level in the lake over the 8-year period. So we can calculate the average water level over the 8-year period. We figured out how to do that last time, right?
Yeah.
We want to determine if the water level is greater than 50 feet above that average. How do we write that in MATLAB? If? What variable or variables are we gonna use in this if statement? Water level. So something about water level. We'll figure out something about it, right? Hold on just a second. And then what's our other variable that we want to compare against? The average. Which average? The average 8-year. So last time we said that was, I think I said, what did I say? AVG 8 years, something like that? Is that how I wrote it last time? So what about the 50? Where does that come in?
50 plus average.
We have to add 50 to the average. And then what kind of conditional thing do we want to put in here? Greater than, equal to, less than or equal to? Greater than. So if water level is greater than average over the 8-year period plus 50. Does that make sense? Questions about that? So now, TJ was telling me what am I going to put in here?
Month, comma, year.
Month, comma, year. What does that tell me? Why do I put month here? Because my months are in my rows. And why do I put year here? Because my years are my columns, right? So you can see that although we did our year for loop first and our month for loop second, I have month and then year here because this is decided by the way my matrix is, not by the order of my for loops. So I can do my for loops whatever order I want. This order is defined by what that matrix looks like. All right? Questions about that? We good? Okay, what are we going to do if that's true? Now we go back and we say we're going to display a bunch of stuff, right? I want to display the month, the year, and some other stuff, some messages like I have on the back side of the paper here. So let's just talk about how to display those numbers, and then you guys can decide whatever message you want to display. So in my first display statement, I want to display the month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Whichever month is the appropriate month, right? What variable should I use there? Should I use water level? What's water level? Water level is the actual level in feet, right? That's not what I want to display. I want to display the month number. So you said it's the month, right? So this index variable is going to change. We told it it's going to start at 1. It's going to increment by 1. That means it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? And inside of my for loop, that index variable only has one number in it, depending on how many times we've done that repetition. So the first time I go through my for loop, month is going to be equal to 1. Second time I go through my for loop, month is going to be equal to 2. So if I display my month, that's going to print out the month number that I'm on. Questions about that? How am I going to display my year? The same thing, except for I display my other index variable, right? Like that? Good? So what about all of our other conditions that we have there? So that takes care of that very first condition, right? What do I put next? If I want to test if the water level is greater than 10 feet above the average water level in the lake for that year.
No, just
Else if. So are those independent if statements or are they like dependent if statements? Can the water level be greater than 50 feet above the average and greater than 50 feet above the average water level in the lake that year? Possibly, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want those to be if else ifs, because if the first one's not true, then we check the second one, or if this first one's true, then MATLAB forgets and doesn't check anything else if we have else if, right? So we want to make these separate if statements. So we want to end here and then have a new if for our next question that we're asking MATLAB. Because those are all independent questions that we're asking MATLAB. So what is that question going to look like? If what? We're still going to have water level. And our index variables don't change. Month, year. What's going to go over here on this right-hand side?
Greater than average.
So we're looking at which average? The average per year, right? Average year, we called that variable?
Yeah, average each year.
That's what I called it?
Yeah, average
Each year?
Then plus 10.
Is average each year a scalar, vector, or a matrix?
No, it's a vector.
It's a vector.
It's a vector of 8 years.
It's got 8 years because we have 8 columns, right? So what do I have to do here? Should I have...
You have to add 1.
Should I move this somewhere?
1 year.
We might be too low. I'll change color. Okay, I'm going to move this up here so everybody can see. If water level year, and this should all go in one line, but I'm going to move to the next line. Less greater than average each year plus 10. What goes in my parentheses there?
1 year.
How do we know that? So we said average each year was from just the regular use of our mean function, right? We take mean of water level, and that gives me my 8 columns. So this vector, average each year, has 1 row, 8 columns, right? So when I use it, I say 1 comma year, because it has 1 row, and I need to change my year with my year index variable. Good? All right. Then what do we do inside of that? Basically the same thing we did over here, right? Then we have another one, then we have another one, and then that's the end of that third task that we're doing there, right? So I'm not going to do the second 2 if statements. I'm going to leave that up to you guys to do. What about this figure here? How are we going to create our first figure? It says we're going to create the figure using subplots, and we're going to have 2 subplots. If you look at this figure on the back, we're going to have 2 subplots. The first subplot, we're going to plot month on the x-axis and the water level on the y-axis. We want 1 curve for each year. And on our second subplot, we have year on our x-axis, water level on our y-axis, with one curve for each month that we have. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to create our plots? So we're going to skip down later in our MATLAB code, and we're going to put our plot commands in there, right? If I want to do my first plot command for my first subplot, what variable is going to go on my x-axis and what variable is going to go on my y-axis? What do I want on my x-axis for that first subplot?
The x-axis is
The month.
Yeah, but
Do I have a variable that has the month's numbers in it?
you have two choices. Even create like a variable for the month
Mm-hmm.
from 1 to 12, or you can put like inside like linspace.
Right, so I could just stick a linspace in here, or I could create a variable that has that stuff in it. So let's just create a variable. We'll create month. We'll say months so that it's different than month over there. Is equal to my, I can use my colon operator. I could say 1, colon, 1, colon, size of water level, comma 1 or comma 2? 1, because I want the rows. So now months is going to be a vector with numbers from 1 to 12. So I'm going to plot, that's going to go on my x-axis. What goes on my y-axis? What variable?
The y-axis is the
Water level. What part of water level do I want to plot? Do I want to plot all of water level? Or some part of water level?
All of the years per month.
So this first curve in the first subplot is going to be for the first year, right? We want all the water levels over the 12 months in year 1.
yeah.
So what is that in this matrix?
It's the
First row or first column?
the first column. The first column, which is the
First column, first row. What do we think?
I think.
Let's come to a consensus.
No.
How many people say row? How many people say column? Ooh, 4 columns. I think we're right there. So we want a year, right? This wants to be the data for the first year. So where's my years? My years are in my columns. If I take all the data in the first column, that's going to give me 12 numbers for my 12 months. And that's going to be what I want to plot here. So how do I do that? How do I get all the rows in the first column? Colon tells MATLAB all the rows, comma 1 for the first column, right? And I close my plot command. If I want to plot in the second year, I just change that to be the second column, right? How else do I know that that's right? So I can look at my picture. That kind of helps. But what if I don't get the picture? How else would I know what should I plot over there? So what's the rules about plotting? We have to have the same number of things on our x-axis as we have on our y-axis, right? That's the rule. So how many numbers do we have in months? 12. So I need 12 numbers to go on my y-axis too, right? If I pull this column out, that has 12 rows, so that's going to be the 12 numbers. If I messed up and I tried to pull out the first row, I would only get 8 numbers, and MATLAB would yell at me. All right? So that's all I'm going to do for you. I'll let you work on the rest of it on your own, the rest of it.